couple weeks ago I did an art fair and met someone who really liked all of my Long Island artwork. He seemed really interested in having me do something for him, and he actually followed up after the show. We did some talking, did some back and forth, and here's what he wanted. Wood cut out of Long Island in the middle, and then some sort of shattered glass or tile around that, and a frame made out of driftwood to go around the whole thing. So I said, hell yeah, I could do that. And so what you're seeing me cut here is the wood to what will be the frame for this project. My customer wanted the piece to be 5 feet by 2.5 feet in total, so I cut the wood to size and then cut this little lip out. I glued and screwed the whole thing up, and at this point I know you're probably saying, hey wait, didn't he want a driftwood frame? And he did, but the problem is driftwood frames and driftwood in general are super expensive, especially for a project of this size. I want to save my client a little bit of money, but I didn't want to sacrifice the quality. So I talked to my cousin, and he actually came up with a really good idea. He said, hey, you know those fences at the beach? And I was like, yeah. And he said, why don't you just use that wood? And I was like, yeah, that's a pretty good idea. That looks like driftwood. It pretty much is driftwood. And it turns out we actually had a huge bundle of these wood planks in my shed already. So I kind of picked through them looking for some good ones. Some of them got rotted because they've been sitting in there forever. And then I glued and clamped them down onto my little 2x2 pieces of wood. I used tape to secure the areas that I didn't have a clamp for. And I also ended up wrapping up pretty much everywhere with the tape just to make sure that all the wood was nice and tight. I set the frame aside to dry overnight and hopped over to working on the Long Island cutout. My client wanted the cutout to be kind of 3D from the glass that is going to be around it. So I took 2 pieces of plywood and glued them together just to give it some extra height because one piece of plywood probably wouldn't have been thick enough. The edges where I glued the 2 pieces of plywood together were seamless. This piece of plywood is going to be my base that the Long Island cutout and the glass are going to sit on, and that the frame is going to go around. You'll see why I'm spray painting it blue in a little bit, although later on I did end up changing the color. Now that the glue on my frame was dry, I was able to pull all the tape off. Right now the frame looks super blocky and square. My plan with this was to kind of build it up with these layers of beechwood and then take a sander and go over all the sides and round it out and give it that really smooth driftwood feel. Since driftwood isn't perfect, I also took a Dremel to it and just kind of gave it some like grooves and imperfections. You can see here how I really started to smooth over. I'd say this is a pretty good substitute for legit driftwood. I ordered this fire glass off of Amazon. This is going to be the glass that I'm using for the project. I bought a dark blue and like a lighter teal blue. Figure when these 2 colors mixed together, they'd look pretty cool. There's like a weird powder coating on the glass, so I just washed them out in these tubs and then laid them all out to dry in the sun. So as I mentioned, I changed the color of the plywood. Since this plywood is going to be the base where all the glass is going to lay on top, I figured white would look better instead of that blue, because when the glass goes on top, you're going to really see the actual color of the glass. I'm just tracing out the shape of my wood cutout and the frame. I want to make sure that when I'm placing my glass down on the plywood, it's not getting in the way of anything. I decided to go with resin to glue all the glass down on the wood. I figured this would be the easiest and quickest way to do it. I can just pour all my resin and then dump the glass down right on top of it. I don't have to worry about gluing each piece of glass individually. I was careful not to get too much glass over where my wood would be going. Oh my god. But you'll see later that I still had to make some adjustments. Now that pretty much everything else was done at this point, it was about time I hopped over and started working on this Long Island map. My client said he wanted the map to be sort of like old-fashioned and kind of treasure hunty, like an old pirate map. And he also wanted me to mark off Montauk and Syosset with a treasure chest. I primed the wood, put my head down, and started painting. I ended up going back and changing the design of these treasure chests. I just felt like they didn't really match the vibe of old pirate map. At this point I pretty much had the map fully painted, but I felt like it was missing something, so I added a little X marks the spot, and just like a little trail connecting the two treasure chests. I figured that would add a pop of color. I sent a picture over to my client just to make sure he was fully happy with the painting aspect. My frame needed to be stained to better match the color of driftwood, so I bought a bunch of these different colored stains to try out, and to be honest, I wasn't really liking any of them. I bought some grays to try out and also some really light browns. I even tried watering down gray paint and using that instead of stain. And hell, I even tried burning the wood first and then staining it after. Alright, so the resin's cured. My plan is to flip it over and let all the glass fall off, and just like any spots that are bare, I'm just going to hot glue the glass back on. Oh my god, this thing is way heavier than I thought. Holy shit. I tried fitting the map back into place, and it was close, but there were still a couple stray pieces of glass that were sticking out, preventing it from falling in place properly. My first idea was to take the Dremel and just try to shave it back a little bit. I quickly realized that that would take way too long, so I switched over to the good old hammer and chisel. Once the map fit nice and snug, I threw the frame on too, just to kind of see how things were starting to come together. And that's when I realized that all those stains that I tested earlier, I definitely did not like, and that the frame needs to kind of match the color of the map a little bit. So I mixed up a new brown color. I kind of mixed a little bit of this grayish color in with it, because at first I didn't really want it to be like too brown. I don't even know if mixing stains is something that people do, but they were both oil-based, so I was like, hey, screw it. You can see here that it ended up being like a milky brown color, and I was hoping that that would sort of match the in-between of what I'm looking for, like a driftwood brown color. After this layer of stain was fully dry, I went back over it with a sander. I was hoping this would give it more of like an imperfect, beat up look, and I ended up giving it another layer of stain because I felt like it wasn't dark enough. Finally connecting my frame to the big piece of plywood. When I flip this bad boy over in a sec, you can see it's starting to look really good and really starting to come together. I was super happy with the color for the frame that I picked out. I feel like it matched with the blue sea glass perfectly. I just called it sea glass instead of fire glass on accident right there, because at a certain point I just started to think of it as sea glass. Left some space between the frame and the resin pieces of glass. Figured it would be easier to afterwards just take some hot glue and fill in these missing spaces. At this point, my client got back to me on what he thought of the map, and he made some pretty good suggestions. He said, what if we move this X at the end of the Montauk right here, and in place of it, put the Montauk Lighthouse? And he wasn't sure what he thought of the dotted lines, so he said maybe we should do footsteps instead. So I did some practice on a scrap piece of wood first, and we ended up going with the lighthouse idea, but keeping the dashed lines for the trail. I wrapped that up and sprayed some varnish on the map to seal everything in. Finally gluing the map down to the piece of plywood. Place some weights down on top to make sure the glue secures it in nice, and then taking more hot glue and just filling in the spaces that I missed. I mixed up some blue paint. I wanted to do one final touch on the glass. Overall, it wasn't as dark blue as I would have liked it to be, so I figured I'd just fill in some of that white that you still see on the background with a darker blue paint. I wanted it to have an illusion that there were still darker pieces of glass even further in the background. And with that done, this beachy Montauk artwork is ready to be shown off. Huge thanks to my client. I hope you really liked it. Thanks for watching.